Okay, hello and welcome to this session. My name is Miles Prosser from the International Aluminium Institute, the IAI, and this session is about taking action to drive decarbonisation in the aluminium industry. We'll talk in a few minutes with some representatives of aluminium producers, but first I've got a few questions for my colleague, Marlene Bertram, who's the Director of Scenarios and Forecasts here at the IAI. Marlene was instrumental in developing the IAI's greenhouse pathways. So Marlene, can you tell us a bit about how you went about preparing an industry-specific budget and trajectory for the aluminium industry, and a little bit about the high-level results?
Thank you very much, Miles, for having me. First of all, our two decarbonization scenarios are consistent with global targets. Not only the endpoint by 2050, but also the slope and the total cumulative carbon budget that would be allocated to the aluminium sector. Our two decarbonization scenarios are aligned with the beyond 2 degrees scenario and the net zero by 2050 scenario published by the International Energy Agency. Our scenarios are global scenarios. We cover mining, refining, and smelting. We also cover recycling and semi-production. As I said, the global scenarios were not focusing on a specific region because carbon emissions are global emissions, so we have decided to use that on a global basis. We are covering all emissions, so meaning scope 1, 2, and also scope 3 for upstream processes. Could you please show the slide now? Thank you very much. Here you see our three scenarios. Today, we emit about 1.1 billion tons of carbon emissions. These are roughly 2% of global emissions, so we have quite a high stake in that. If we do nothing, that's our business as usual scenario, these 1.1 billion tons will actually grow or are estimated to grow to 1.6 million tons. For the two decarbonization scenarios, the beyond 2 degrees scenario, emissions would have to reduce to 250 million tons. For the 1.5 degree scenario, these would be reduced to 53 million tons. As you can see in this slide, the decarbonization that has to happen for the 1.5 degree scenario are quite massive. By 2030, we're looking at a quarter reduction. By 2035, we're looking at 70% reduction, and by 2050 at 95% reduction for the global sector. So you can take that slide off again.
So there's some significant reductions, Marlene. What sort of technologies and pathways are going to be important if we're to achieve those reductions?
Yes, the IAI developed actually 3 pathways and also published these together with some technologies that are possible. The first is decarbonization of the electricity. 60% of our emissions are actually coming from the electricity generation. So that is our biggest pathway. Secondly, reduction of direct emissions. Here we see the switch from fossil fuel to green hydrogen. We see electrification of refining, casting, and also recycling processes. But we also see novel technologies like inert anodes for smelting. The last pathway is recycling. Today, we recycle about 34 million tons of scrap every year. In our forecast, this would grow to 80 to 90 million tons. The aluminium industry is ready to take that scrap, but of course, there have to be a certain mechanism also for the recycling pathway. We need to upgrade mixed low-quality scrap. We need to do better in sorting. Laser or X-ray sorting will play a big role, but also we have to look at more complicated products that are multi-material products where you have to take the aluminium away from the other materials.
Thanks, Marlene. And how is this analysis that's been done by the IAI? How's it being used by others, including some of the member companies?
Yeah, so I think we have been quite successful with our scenarios, and they have been seen as actually very trustworthy scenarios that have been used by a lot of initiatives. At COP26, we announced together with the Mission Possible partnership that we would cooperate in setting up a sector transition strategy for the aluminium industry. This has now been published, and 9 of our members have actually also already endorsed that work. Within this work, the 1.5 degree scenarios has been endorsed and also has been used in this model. We are also working, of course, closely with other initiatives, the Aluminium Stewardship Initiative, and also the Rocky Mountain Institute. But as you say, most important is what the aluminium industry is doing. What are they actually doing? So I think we can be quite happy with what is happening. Since our publication of the 1.5 degree scenario, 80% of our membership has actually announced clear reduction goals, and also have started with implementing some technologies, also with doing extensive research to really reduce the carbon emissions. Also, 70% of our membership have now a 2050 net zero goal.
Thanks, Marlene. That sounds great. So what we might do now is we've got a short video which outlines some of the commitments that are being made by aluminium companies. So we'll go to that video and then we'll come back and discuss it further with the panel.
Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Ali Al-Baqali. I am CEO of Aluminium Bahrain, ALBA. ALBA started as the first aluminium smelter in the Middle East. Last year, we have celebrated our golden jubilee of operation by recording a cumulative production of more than 25 million metric tons since 1971. ALBA is currently producing around 1.6 million metric tons per annum. As a responsible flagship company in the Kingdom of Bahrain, ALBA is fully committed to Bahrain's net zero emission by 2060, under the leadership of His Royal Highness Prince Salman bin Hamad Al Khalifa, the Crown Prince and the Prime Minister.
At Alcoa, we have a clear vision to reinvent the aluminum industry for a sustainable future. We have stated ambition to be net zero by 2050, with a 30% reduction by 2025 and 50% by 2030. In addition, we're starting from a great place as the world's lowest CO2 intensity refiner, and also 80% of our smelters run on renewable power.
We are fully integrated in the aluminum chain. We go all the way from the mining to the extruded products and also flat rolled products production. ESG is integrated in our business strategy. We have 10 pillars, one of them is climate change. We have deployed the 10 pillars in 15 programs. One of them is to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. And we have deployed this program in 30 goals to 2030. One of them is to reduce 40% of the greenhouse gas emission, considering the mining operation to the smelting operation and casting operation.
My name is Abdel Nasser bin Kalban. I am the CEO of Emirates Global Aluminium, the largest premium aluminium producer in the world. Aluminium is essential material to develop a more sustainable society as a part of everything from electric vehicle to wind farms. It also matters how sustainably aluminium is made.
Hindalco is one of the world's largest non-ferrous companies. We are the world's largest rolling company with 4 million tons of FRP through our wholly owned subsidiary Novelis. In India, we have 1.3 million tons of upstream aluminium capacity with about 400 KT of downstream, as well as a 400 KT copper smelter along with copper rod plants.
Hydro's path to decarbonization is based on 3 pillars. Becoming a net zero company in terms of scope 1 and 2 by 2050 or earlier. delivering zero carbon aluminum products to our customers, and enabling the removal of carbon from the broader industry and society through our renewable energy, hydrogen, and battery business.
My name is Emilio Braghi, and I'm the president of Novelis Europe. Novelis is not only the largest producer of rolled flat products, but it's also the largest aluminum recycling company.
I am Engineer Saeed Mohammed Al-Masoudi, Chief Executive Officer of Suhar Aluminium, the first and exclusive primary aluminium smelter situated in the Sultanate of Oman, with an annual capacity of more than 395,000 tons of high-quality aluminium. At our organization, we give utmost importance to the safety of our people and the sustainability of our operation.
We fully recognize the central challenge of averting climate change. As a major UAE company, we are committed to our nation net zero by 2050 strategic initiative. Power generation counts for more than 60% of the global aluminum industry's greenhouse gas emissions. Last year, EGA became the first company in the world to produce aluminum commercially using solar power. We call this metal celestial. We are now working on a bold initiative to divest our captive natural gas-fired power stations and instead source the power from the grid. As the largest single grid customer, our steady demand would unlock substantial further development of solar power generation capacity in the UAE.
We have invested more than $1.1 billion in the past 10 years. We have doubled our recycled content up to 60% of our metal intake. And we are doing more. We have the largest recycling center worldwide in Nachtested, Germany. Recycling, for us, is the right way to go towards the carbon footprint reduction of our industry. And again, we are investing more. We are investing in North America for 2 new recycling centers.
We launched our ESG roadmap in April 2022, which targeted 6 pillars, and decarbonization is one of our major priorities. Our plan is to reduce the overall emission by 35% by 2035 from the baseline of 2015. And this plan will take us to zero by 2060, subject to the availability of the mature technologies. Alba is embarking on a new project where a 4th block will be added to its existing power station 5. Block 4 will be enabled to use a mix of hydrogen and natural gas, which will reduce Alba's overall carbon footprint and set a benchmark in sustainable power generations. The commercial operation will be in Q4 2024. The second project is Alba Spent Potlining SPL. SPL treatment plant is the first of its kind in the region that utilize a zero waste process to transform the created SPL waste into a valuable product, which is then used in other industries with a capex of $37 million. SPL treatment plant has been in operation since December 2021.
This 40% reduction, we are going to do that by doing 3 major things. One of them is to implement a biomass boiler to produce steam for our aluminum refinery. The other one is the upgrade of the smelter furnace technology. And the third one is to increase the recycling business for our company. This goal was approved by the Science-Based Target, and we are going to reduce the emission from 4.02 to 2.45 until 2030.
Hindalco has made a very clear 2050 target for net zero carbon. Now, we realize that in India, most of our energy source comes from coal. So we are taking a series of intermediate steps to get towards that zero net carbon in 2050. So in the short term for 2025, we have taken a target to reduce our emissions by 25% from our 2012 baseline. So beyond that, we are working a lot on renewable energy, storage of energy, as well as carbon capture projects. So quite a lot of very specific targets to reach towards that 2050 target of net zero.
Realizing the long-term impact that our industry could have on the environmental if proper steps are not initiated now. Sohar Aluminium has embarked on a journey with a decarbonization aspirational timeline in place. This will see us take several steps such as diversification of energy sources and innovative technology adoption, which are expected to help us decarbonize our business.
We have a technology roadmap that has three pieces. First of all, the ELYSIS technology is a smelting technology that eliminates all CO2 intensity in the smelting process and replaces the CO2 with oxygen. Second, our Refinery of the Future project is very broad, but included its complete decarbonization of the refining process. And lastly, the Estrella technology is a scrap purification process, which can take any scrap input and purify it to a product that's better than any smelter in the world.
We have set several milestones on our path to decarbonization. Reduce our emissions by 10% by 2025 and 30% by 2030 from my 2018 baseline. One major milestone here is our fuel switch and electrification project in our alumina refinery, Alumínio in Brazil. This will reduce our annual CO2 emissions by 1.1 million tons.
We have some very ambitious targets like a 1 gigawatt floating solar on the Hirakud Dam. We are working on about 4 to 5 tons per day carbon capture project in one of our smelters. And we also have a very ambitious pumped hydro project that is ongoing. So we realize that because of our large dependency on coal, Hindalco has to actually work quite hard to achieve its net zero carbon target. So overall, besides carbon, a very holistic sustainability program with some very specific milestones all along the way for Hindalco.
We firmly believe that recycling is the right response to the circularity requirement of our industry. And our vision is to be the leading supplier of low-carbon aluminum solutions.
Today, ALBA is closely working with different stakeholders and partners worldwide to achieve our ESG roadmap. We believe that this is a collective effort and together we will do it. Over 5 decades, we have conducted our business responsibly and sustainably. And looking ahead, we aim to be the ESG change that we want to see in the world.
Hydro believes that low carbon, responsibly produced, recycled metals and materials are part of the solution and the future is bright. For anyone who recognizes that the future society needs from us here and now and is able to act on it.
The time is now for all of us as an industry players to come together and put in concerted and coordinated efforts to ensure global decarbonization and net zero targets are met in time.
Decarbonizing power generation is the biggest step, but just one step on what must be an ambitious journey. Aluminium is required for decarbonization economy-wide, and we must work together in cooperation with other sectors to decarbonize our own industry.
I think in summary, we have to realize that aluminium is in a very interesting paradoxical situation. On one hand, aluminium is very energy intensive and hence the big focus on the decarbonization, and it's one of the hard to abate sectors. But at the same time, aluminium is a green metal and is going to play a huge role in the electrification of the world economy. So I think that as a sector, we have to work together to decarbonize aluminium because the usages of aluminium in the greening of the world economy is only going to grow going forward.
So that's been a snapshot of commitments to decarbonisation from major aluminium companies. We'll now have a panel discussion with the representatives from some of those companies, and they've got the challenge of delivering on those commitments. So the panel that we have consists of Salman Abdullah, who's the Executive Vice President for Environment, Health and Safety with Emirates Global Aluminium, Scott Harper, the Global Director for Climate Change from Alcoa, Diksha Vats, the Chief Sustainability Officer for Aditya Birla, and Leandro Faria, the Sustainability General Manager for CBA. So the speed and scale of emission reduction objectives of your companies are quite ambitious, as we've just heard. And the emissions reduction opportunities are going to vary depending on the location of your facilities and your position in the supply chain. So I'll start by getting each of you to describe a little bit about your company's operations and your greenhouse gas objectives and the greatest challenges for your specific situation. So Salman, I might get you to lead that off, please. You're on mute, I think, Salman.
Thank you very much for this opportunity, Miles. Yes, I mean, overall, EGA is based and stationed in the Middle East, where traditionally gas-fired engines are the key drivers of economy, and aluminium industry in Middle East is no different. So we have a very large infrastructure of gas turbines, and particularly EGA itself has its own captive power plants, which are based on gas turbines. So in the last 10 years, we have been very focused on getting the most efficient engines, which has helped reduce the carbon footprint of the electricity, but that's clearly not enough. And as you heard from our CEO, we are divesting away from there and will be leveraging more on the grid, which now have a combination of solar as well as nuclear. So this is very specific to the region and to United Arab Emirates, and we intend to leverage on this as much as we can. And we actually have already kicked off one project with the BMW, where we supply the celestial metal, which is purely made out of the sun, out of the Mohammed bin Rashid solar park. We imported the power, almost half a trillion hours of megawatts, and into our reduction cells to produce this metal. So more of that is to come. Thank you.
Thanks, Alan. Scott, over to you from an Alcoa perspective.
Thanks very much, Miles. And perhaps just before I respond, to thank the IAI for bringing together these panelists today for the discussion, and also for the ICC for the forum that this discussion forms a broader part of. So Alcoa is a global vertically integrated aluminium company that operates bauxite mines, alumina refineries, and aluminium smelters on 6 continents. It perhaps won't surprise you to hear that we have an ambition to meet the objectives of the Paris Agreement. So we have a net zero by 2050 target as our long-term target. We have a 50% reduction by 2030 from a 2015 baseline. And we also have a target of a 30% reduction by 2025. Perhaps also worth touching on, I know we're going to get there in the discussion today, Miles, but also when we're talking about target setting, of course, we really need to be thinking about scope 3, and I can say that we're actively considering how we're going to approach scope 3 as well. In terms of challenges, look, I think, options as well of how to get to the end point, net zero by 2050, the great report that the IAI and Mission Possible Partnership put together really does set that out well. And I think what it does particularly is shows you that there are a range of options to get there. And then I think what it also talks about too, though, as well, is the greatest challenge is that this is not something that industry can do alone. This is a global concerted effort that requires coordination with governments. And again, just to say, why I think it's great that we're having a discussion like this in the context of COP. When countries come together to make those commitments in forums like COP, it provides, an opportunity for coordination when those countries then go to implement these things at a national level. And this is businesses need to drive the change towards net zero. So I think the challenge is the coordination piece at a global level. I think COP is a great forum for that to be ironed out. And it's great to see the companies represented here today meeting to discuss this challenge. Thanks, Miles.
Thanks, Scott. Diksha, over to you. You've got quite a different company profile in terms of both operations and emissions from your perspective.
Yeah, no, you're right. And I would echo what Salman and Scott have said before me. Thank you for this opportunity. And I think having heard from Marlon on how we work together to drop that sector pathway, and then Satish and Emilio spoke about what we've been looking at in terms of the sector, as in which part of the value chain that we're operating in, and also in terms of where we are in geographies we are using, looking at different levers. for example, in the Asian operations, it's a lot about how can we use more greener power. And in most of our geographies where Novelis is present in 4 continents, there we are looking at recycling as a key lever to decarbonize. And so that's how to use the solutions which work well in each of the locations that we are in is what we are using in it to achieve our longer term target, which we've set for 2050, and then also medium term targets in terms of whether it's the the reverse logistics, the remelting operations, renewable energy because in renewable energy it's a lot about can we get it to be in dispatchable form. So therefore, exploring what could be the storage solutions, whether it's pumped hydro or it's battery-based solutions. So that's how we are looking at. And another important thing is also to look at the whole thing holistically in terms of saying that when we talk about decarbonization or any of the sustainable things, it is ultimately about, are we looking at climate, nature, and equity all together in the same breath? So that's how we're looking at it, Miles. Thank you.
Thanks, Diksha. And Leandro, you've got operations in South America. Do you want to bring a perspective from that geography?
Thank you, Miles, to be part of this panel. Thank you for other colleagues on this panel. And CBI is a Brazilian company, as you mentioned, and we have worked hard to become a reference in sustainability by guaranteeing the supply of low-carbon aluminum and sustainable solution. All these things in partnership with our stakeholders and developing also around communities and positively influence the entire aluminum chain. So our strategies span across the environment, social, and governance pillars. So these 3 pillars break down in 10 key drivers, Miles, and 4 in environmental pillar, 2 in the social pillar, and 3 in the governance pillar, and 1 more cross-cutting driver related to the communication process. Linked to these pillars, we have 15 programs with 31 goals set for 2030, which I invite everyone to learn more about in our website and our annual report. Look at the environmental pillar. I would like to highlight our climate change driver, which is composed by 2 programs: greenhouse gas emission management and energy management. Miles, nowadays our emissions performance is highly competitive, mainly because our source of power is completely clean and comes from our 21 hydropower plants. Because of that, CBA produces aluminum 5 times less than the world's average emissions. The global average reported at the smelter stage is 12.8, and our performance is 2.56 tons of CO2 per ton of aluminum. Although our emissions are among the lowest in the industry, CBA has undertaken efforts to reduce them even further. We have set a goal to reduce 40% of CO2 emission, including mining, refining, smelting, and casting process. This goes by 2030, considering 2019 as a base year. We have been working in 3 main processes: upgrade of our technology and smelter, increasing our capacity to recycling, and changing our energy matrix for boilers at the refinery that used fossil fuels to wood biomass from reforestation areas. This is very important. This initiative coupled have already helped us to reduce our emission by 25.4% from 29 baseline. And finally, CBA is currently working to create a roadmap to become emission neutral by 2050. To this end, we are studying new technology that are not yet feasible and available in a short-term search, anode and capture. This is a huge challenge from my point of view for all along the sector. Thank you.
Thanks, Leandro. So we heard mention already about Scope 3 emissions, and we're seeing an increased focus on Scope 3 emissions in greenhouse gas accounting. Now, obviously, your businesses have Scope 3 emissions, but you're also other businesses' Scope 3 emissions. So can we talk a little bit about the challenges for accounting of Scope 3, but also the importance of collaboration across the value chain for emissions reductions? So Diksha, you've got a lot of operations that expand across the value chain. Do you want to offer a view from your perspective?
Yeah, thanks, Miles. I think Scope 3, because there's been a lot of discussion around how can we kind of enhance the level of reporting and then use of that data that we collect to kind of drive performance. And we see it very differently, within our operations to say, looking at from up, when you look at from upstream towards the downstream operations and then the other way. One very important insight that the Scope 3 emission data gives you is in terms of how to lead the conversation to a product level footprint, in addition to what it would be a organization level footprint. So it allows you to have both conversations in that sense. Having said that, it therefore requires you to get the the need for a very uniform way of calculating Scope 3 emissions, that the terminology or the lexicon that is there across the value chain is common. So that's first challenge that comes up, that how it's being calculated, how do you draw the boundaries? So in some sense, therefore, aligns to what you would talk about in terms of a product footprint. It then, having said that, then working very closely with the suppliers, some of them could be very small. So for getting them to understand what is in it for them to do that elaborate exercise of understanding that, collecting the data, and then reporting the data. And I think another very important thing in a challenge in Scope 3 is also to how do you, and linked to point number one, is the whole challenge of double counting. Because when we are talking about that, my Scope 1 is somebody else's Scope 3, and in the whole value chain. So which is why collaborating with all the value chain players and having a common way of calculating and reporting is very important to avoid the risk of double counting, and therefore the whole worry of greenwashing in that sense. So I would kind of leave it at that.
Thanks, Diksha. And Scott, you mentioned Scope 3 in your answer to the first question. Do you want to talk a little about it from an Alcoa perspective?
Yeah, look, absolutely, Miles. And I think like many companies, we've been reporting Scope 3 emissions for some time already. I think that the real challenge that we're talking about here is how to get better access to primary data, moving away from secondary data, moving away from, industry aggregate data or data derived from different types of methodology. And Diksha's really hit the nail on the head there, because it's really about agreeing a standardized methodology for calculating Scope 3 emissions that navigates around the problems of double counting. Because if we start to double count on emissions, then we're going to completely undermine the whole point of the carbon accounting for Scope 3s. So, on the supplier side for us, when we're talking about particularly raw materials, I think we have to be honest with ourselves that across, at a global level, across the economic sectors, not everyone is moving at the same pace. So perhaps the discussion with suppliers might be more around capacity building. We have a lot of expertise in reporting emissions because of the emissions intensive nature of our operations. Is there an opportunity then to deepen what is fundamentally a commercial relationship into one also that's built around capacity building in the context of emissions reporting? So I think there's a really big opportunity there on the supplier side. On the downstream customer side, we have customers all throughout our value chain. So some customers are customers who buy alumina, some customers are customers that buy aluminium. I think the point is, though, that heading down, I think it's about driving consumer behaviour. I think it's really critically important that in the context of the Scope 3 discussion that we're driving consumer behaviour towards low carbon products. This is so integral to what we're trying to achieve as a sector. Thanks, Miles.
Thanks, Scott. I'd like to turn now to the question of investment. The sort of emissions reductions we're talking about are significant and presumably also bring a substantial amount of investment requirements. The Mission Possible Partnership estimated in the order of $1 trillion worth of investment is required by 2050. So I'd like to ask what sort of collaboration and policies or actions are needed from both governments and investors to help bring on that level of investment. Leandro, I might turn to you first.
Thank you, Miles. In fact, this is a tough question, but I would like to emphasize two important drivers. First, establish partnership. From my point of view, this is the way. The time to put efforts on climate change is now. When you're talking about climate change, as I said, everyone wins or everyone loses. There's no middle ground in this agenda. So financial institutions and governments and private sector as well need to join efforts to carry out of the energy transition. So the second drivers, in my opinion, is about coalition to stimulate demand growth between those who already produce low carbon aluminum and those who intend to buy this aluminum. So now there are already movements to stimulate this demand growth, such as First Movers Coalition, for example, led by the World Economic Forum, that this kind of examples can contribute to the financing of this transition. Thank you.
Thanks, Leandro. And Salman, you mentioned your company's or your country's investments in solar energy. Can you talk a little about that sort of collaboration between governments and investors and the aluminium industry?
Yeah, thank you, Miles. This is a very, very important question in the United Arab Emirates. And in addition to solar parks and the nuclear plant, I would also like to put in the mix that in COP26, United Arab Emirates declared a leadership for hydrogen fuel. As I mentioned earlier, majority, if not all our assets in power industry, both within EGA and in the cities, are gas turbines. So hydrogen and conversion of these existing infrastructure to utilize hydrogen fully is an essential part of it, but it cannot be done simply by the industry alone. It has to be collaboration between the government and, more importantly, the policies that they set in for moving and for this transition to take place. Another item is storage. I mean, we talk about solar, but then along with it comes the storage. Should it be electrical? But it can also be, as somebody mentioned, as pumped storage. And then pumped storage also does not necessarily need to be water-based. It could be mechanical weight-based. So in UAE, these are all the initiatives that the government is looking at, and we are working in tandem with that and looking at entering long-term contracts with them as off-takers. So it goes hand in hand. Because at the end of the day, government does not also have infinite amount of resources. They need organizations like aluminum industry, which are very key with them and be by their side and say, yes, we will offtake this power after this investment on the long run. So we are extremely lucky in the UAE that the industry, the government, and the policies around it is working in tandem. And I would really invite people to come and look at it as a case study on how it should be implemented. Otherwise, without that, a smelter based in the Middle East, in a gas resource area, it will be just impossible to make a transition to net zero. Thank you.
Thanks, Salman. And that sort of brings up the issue, I guess, of the overlap between investment and technology. Scott, I might turn to you. Can you talk a little bit about some of the technological changes we might be expecting to see as the aluminium industry decarbonises?
Absolutely, Miles. And what I might do is perhaps just do a little blend of response to the last question and the technology roadmap that we have got developed, seeing as we've heard already from Ben Carrs, from Alcoa on the sort of the pillars of that technology pathway. And I will say that we've been the beneficiaries of strong relationships, particularly with governments around the development of that technology. So taking ELYSIS as an example, the Canadian government's provided significant support for us to take that from where it has been for some time in R&D and towards the industrial scale production that we have today, and onwards towards a commercial package that we're aiming at delivering in 2024. Similarly, in Australia, we've been the recipient of federal funding and state funding from the West Australian government for research into two technologies, mechanical vapor recompression and electric calcination. And both of them in different ways have significant potential to displace the use of fossil fuels in the alumina refining process. And frankly, in the case of MVR as well, have some other benefits in terms of the reductions in the usage of other natural resources like fresh water. So we see significant potential in these technologies, and we've been the beneficiaries, as I've said, of government support, and that remains to be one of the best ways that governments can support our sector as we move forward.
Thanks, Scott. And Diksha, you operate in a slightly different part of the value chain than some of the other companies there. Are there other technological opportunities that are available?
So as both Satish and Emilio have spoken about what we are looking at in different parts of the value chain, I would refer back to, for example, Satish spoke about how we are working with the government in one of the states that we are present in, where our smelter is, to say, can we make a floating solar over the reservoir that exists near the plant location, and which serves both the purposes in a location like that you get solar, but you also reduce the evaporation from that reservoir in the hotter months. So it serves that combination thing. So looking at how we could be innovative in some of those things. And similarly in Novelis, it's been a lot about the way we can do recycling in the best manner. In last 10 years, we've invested more than $700 million to expand the aluminium recycling operations. Novelis had indeed, you asked the question about financing. So Novelis raised sustainability-linked bonds to finance some of these greening of our operations. So those are the technological things. So largely it's about energy efficiency that we are looking at. It's about looking at how we can expand the way we recycle, both in terms of reverse logistics, working very closely with our customers. So whether it's in the automotive value chain or if it's in the beverage can value chain, so working closely with the end users, and then working with the government on how we could enhance the footprint of the cleaner energy sources. So that's a combination. And I guess the fourth, in some sense, what I've spoken about, and Satish referred to it, is the whole product stewardship piece. That how do we kind of expand or help other sectors improve their carbon footprint and their ability to sustain in times to come by the way of making the metal that we are making. Yeah.
Thanks, Diksha. And obviously here we're focusing on climate change in this session, and these companies here rightly consider climate change the most important environmental issue. But it's obviously not the only issue of sustainability around the aluminium industry. So can I ask you to talk a bit about those other issues of sustainability, what they are, but also what the interaction is between those issues and climate change? So Leandro, I might ask you first if you want to offer a view about that, particularly coming from, as you do, an operation in South America and operating right along the value chain.
Thank you, Miles. There's, as you mentioned, there's a lot of other agendas that we need to put efforts, like diversity, for example, inclusion, for example. But I would like to emphasize that biodiversity protection actions are very relevant to maintain the balance of our biomes, and this is directly linked to the climate change. At CBA, for example, we have been working to protect the biome of Cerrado and Atlantic forest with some actions related to reforestation, reducing emission from deforestation and forestation degradation. And that kind of project can even generate carbon credit, for example, to offset our emission in the future.
Thanks, Leandro. And Salman, your job title obviously has you covering a range of these sorts of issues. So tell me a little bit about, from your perspective, how you bring together those various issues across the sustainability spectrum.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for that question, because we have always maintained that GHG reduction is a very important and topical matter, but all aspects of ESG are critical. And particularly, we have raised the point about gender diversity in our industry. We are a small country, we are a small population, and to ensure that all our population is part of the progression into the next century is important. So gender diversity, and the other very important thing, which is directly with climate change, Miles, we're not doing journey to net zero just for the sake of it. It's because there are significant consequences if we don't do that. And some of those consequences we've already started seeing. And the awareness around climate adaptation is a topic which is very close to our hearts in EGA, and we are working towards it. And particularly when we work in areas like Guinea for our mines, it's important that anyone associated with the aluminium business, there is a significant and marked and traceable improvement in standard of living. So these are a number of items. So GHG, absolutely top of the list today, but all other sustainability aspects, particularly as structured out by the ASI and IAI, are important, and we work on all of them in tandem.
Thanks, Alan. And Diksha, from your perspective, operating both at the primary aluminium production end, but also at the recycling side of things, tell us a little about the interaction of these sustainability issues.
Yeah, so I'll build on what both Leandro and Salman spoke about. When we talk about from E perspective and talking about climate change, given the kind of, for example, the two key impacts of climate change, which have been visible in 2022 itself, has been the heat waves and the flooding that we've seen, whether it's the flooding in Pakistan, followed by the flooding that happened in Bangalore in India, or the northern part of India experiencing temperatures touching almost 50 degrees. So if you're running a smelter, when the outside temperatures are 50 degrees, the kind of heat stress that the workers would face are all realities. So to assess and understand what kind of vulnerabilities due to these climate changes which are happening is one area that we've been working on, and therefore what are the kind of adaptation measures that we could be taking. So that's one key other side of climate change measures that we are looking at in all our locations, depending on, of course, first doing this assessment on what our vulnerabilities are in different locations. And then second important piece of work is about sustainable mining, because when we are looking at in terms of saying, so are we mining in a way that is seen sustainable, which then when we talk about sustainable, it brings in the aspect of E, so the work around land use and biodiversity protection. We've worked over last almost 8 years now. We've been working very closely with IUCN, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, how we developed our assessment frameworks, and then have been doing assessments with IUCN at different locations, and have developed biodiversity management plans with them. And that includes what Leandro referred to, that how are we going to do our reforestation or afforestation activities keeping in view the indigenous plant species, or even within the plant locations when we are undertaking say horticulture activities. So even in those, are we picking up the indigenous plant species? So big and small both. And therefore, to look at that in E on climate change, it is about looking at both decarbonization and the adaptation side of it. And then I spoke about biodiversity. I think biodiversity as a topic in some sense subsumes how you would look at things like waste. We worry about waste because there's not enough land and we don't want to convert the land use to create more space to store. So therefore, we've taken target of zero waste to landfill by 2030. We are talking about no net loss in biodiversity. We are talking about reduction in freshwater consumption. We're talking about becoming water positive in our mining locations. So a lot of these, and similarly on S side of things, working with all kinds of stakeholders, whether it's the employees, therefore the occupational health and safety issues, with the communities and therefore community empowerment, with suppliers and therefore supplier sustainability. So looking at an S with all the relevant stakeholders, because after all, S is all about people. And similarly in G, it's about all that I've just spoken about. Are we being transparent? Is that data available? For example, one of the things that we're working on now is to create a sustainability data lake. So all the data that we collect on the E and S aspects come into a data lake, which then can be used for both reporting as well as for drawing up insights, then that can be used for target setting and performance improvement. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Diksha. Scott, your company's got the challenge of operating in a number of different locations around the world. You must see different issues coming to the fore in different localities that you operate. So tell us a bit about how you balance those.
Absolutely, Miles. And we've touched on some elements of that around climate adaptation. And I think what we're really talking about there is different climate scenario modeling to understand physical risks associated with our operations. And, that link for us between the value chain is so critical that, if access to bauxite becomes a problem, then, well, there is no aluminium. And I think in that way, the bauxite mining really does manifest a kind of physical risk component, because we know that in some areas where we're operating, there's likely to be greater water scarcity over time, and in some operating contexts, we're going to have more water issues to manage, more unpredicted, unplanned, intense water events. The social sustainability side of things is paramount for us. The social license to continue to operate is critical. And there are significant intersections with biodiversity, because where do people derive value? It's often from biodiversity value. And so there is a sort of a triangle that starts to exist with water, biodiversity, and social value. And so for us, it's really about getting a full understanding, bringing together a risk assessment around those things, and then making a plan. And it's something that I think that we're going to have to see more of in coming years.
Thanks, Scott. So obviously in talking across these topics, we can see there's a lot of significant issues there, and this won't be something that we find a solution to in the short term. So I'd like to sort of bring the panel to a close by asking each of the panelists to project your mind forward 5 years from where we are today. If this group or its equivalent was meeting again in 5 years' time, what will be the big issues that we're facing now, and what will be the things that we think we've done well in the last 5 years? So Salman, I might pass you to do the future projecting first.
Yes, as we have all been talking about, I think in 5-6 years' time, when we meet again, if we meet again, this group, my view will be about the climate adaptation. Have we done enough? A lot of people talk about that this is a cyclic thing, nothing to do with GHG, and that may be the case, may not be the case. I'm not going to go into the origin story of where it's all happening, but we are facing this challenge now. And people a couple of 100 years ago what was the adaptation for them? Just roll up your tent and go up the mountain. And that was the adaptation. Today, that is not the case. We have invested concrete and steel down to the earth's crust, and we just can't just leave it alone. So we really, the mitigation things, I think we have come a long way from the first time we met in London under the IAI umbrella, Miles, and really the history of aluminium owe it to the IAI for starting that off. But I think we have to very focusedly move towards adaptation, and it has to get sharper focus as we move forward. That would be my take on that.
Thanks, Alan. Scott, do you see technology being one of the big changes we come across in the next 5 years?
Look, I think the technology roadmaps all point to a similar conclusion that for the coming years, and certainly for the next 5 years, there's going to be still a considerable amount of research and development in those technologies. So where will we be in 5 years? Well, I think further along that journey, and I think there'll be greater clarity on exactly what will be commercially, viable. If I'm such a big proponent of climate adaptation work, but I don't want to be repetitive of what Salman said, which I entirely agree with. But what I will say, perhaps just again to focus on the technology side, I think what we're going to see 5 years, maybe the early horizon for it, but I will say considerably more focus and pressure around commercialization of intellectual property around decarbonisation technology. I think this is going to be a really big issue because companies are all pursuing different pathways, different options, different technologies. Some will work well, some will work less well. There's going to be a considerable pressure on those who develop technologies that work well to make that technology available to others within the sector. Of course, there's a tension there between the investment that's been made over time and the commercial nature of that investment and providing that within the context of the global effort towards net zero. So I can see that, would forecast that is going to be a challenge that we're going to all have to work together. And I think, again, just drives home their point around the importance of partnerships and collaboration within our sector, which, is very much in the spirit of these types of discussions at COP.
Great. Thanks, Scott. Diksha, from your perspective, I imagine some of those same issues come to the fore?
Yes, I think Salman and Scott have said it. For me, I guess if I have to pick up, two things which would be great if we can achieve in the next 5 years. One is common lexicon, that, we speak the same language. So therefore, we all agree that, that how you can't do one without the other. So you can't address climate change without addressing things around environment or nature. You can't do both of them without taking people along. So therefore, on this common lexicon and that triangulation of the three things to come together, that, you can't do one without the other. And second thing, which is in a way reflection of this, is that we've started the transition and it's a just transition. So nobody gets left behind. So we don't expect people in parts of Asia and in Africa to say, too bad, you missed the birth lottery, you stay in darkness, but we will, in some parts of the world, make incremental changes to the way we use energy. So I think for me, that's also an extremely important part of bringing climate, equity, and nature together, that in this whole race, nobody can left behind, even if we are not thinking like this. It's going to, if it's going to flood in Pakistan, it could very well be flooding in Germany, and California could have its wildfires. So for me, it's that.
Great. Thanks, Diksha. And I don't want to leave Leandro behind either. So, Leandro, we're running out of time, but do you want to add anything to those conclusions about where we might be?
Really fast. I fully agree with the other panelists, but I would like to emphasize that partnership and coalition to facilitate our decarbonization trajectory. Because for us at CBA, only makes sense if you work together, producing solution to transform lives, as aluminium can do it.
Thanks, Leandro. Thanks, and thanks on behalf of everybody for all our panelists here today for their contributions they've made to this discussion. There's a lot to be done in the aluminium industry. I'm confident that there is a commitment there and investments occurring. And I'd encourage anyone who's interested to follow the International Aluminium Institute or any of these companies here on social media or through their websites to see the progress that's made in coming years. Thank you very much for your attention, and thanks again to the panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you.